Hello and welcome to another episode of Starside Chat. I'm one of your hosts, Zach, and joining me as always is Aaron Capo.
Hello.
And we are under 50 days until fall. I don't know
true.
if that's a marker that anybody keeps. I am counting down the days because I'm done with this summer. That's for sure.
I gotta say, pre-fall and perhaps fall are my favorite seasons. When it's like pretty warm out, but the evenings, it's like I've heard it described as like a hoodie and shorts weather, where like it's nice you can have like a shirt and shorts, but then in the evening you put on your hoodie, and it's like the perfect weather for that.
I am all about sweatshirt weather, so if we can get there faster this year, I would love it. We were just talking about it before we started recording, but it's like very hot this weekend where we live. Yeah. But like over the next week, it's going to like drop down into the 70s. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we'll get fall weather a little early this year. But we do have a lot of stuff to talk about this week. It's been sort of a bloodbath in the games industry over the last week.
I guess.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to... Do you want to start with Game Informer or do you want to start with Bungie layoffs?
I don't know. I think the bigger deal is Game Informer.
Yeah.
Because it's been around for 33 years, and it was an institution. Jeff Keighley was tweeting all this crazy stuff about little stories you heard about it. But, I mean, the last couple of years have been rough for Game Informer. They had that initial mass layoff, like, what is that, like 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah.
And consolidated into basically a very small space with a very small number of people. And this past Friday, they were just like, this is it. Everything is over. They changed the website landing page to just like a single image and locked everything down. And GameStop basically shut it all down, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the magazine started in 1991. So like there's a good shot that most of us like grew up either reading the magazine or like following their coverage online. And so I thought like, well, why wouldn't you just sell Game Informer rather than close it down? And I thought maybe there was a chance that they were going to be allowed to go independent because like a few months ago, GameStop had finally let them start selling directly to subscribers.
Yeah.
And so I was like, now you don't have to have some weird like GameStop subscription thing to get Game Informer. But that has proved not to be the case. Kotaku reported that staff were called into a meeting and were just basically told, we're closing down the magazine and you're being laid off. And one person was like in the middle of a work trip when that message happened. So that sucks. But yeah, I think the bigger deal, or just as big a deal, is that, yeah, their landing page now, just like every URL for Game Informer just redirects to that landing page that has that like farewell that was not written by anybody on Game Informer staff, by the way. And Jason Schreier was like, I think maybe this was written by AI because it seems like, I don't know, kind of a super generic like farewell type of message, and he even like asked some AI to write like a farewell message for Game Informer, and it reads oddly similar. But yeah, it definitely sucks because I think the people that wrote for Game Informer all those years are like, well, now I can't access the work like that they had done.
Yeah, they can't get their stuff to even like put in their portfolio.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, a bunch of staff were laid off like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe it was probably longer than that because I think it was before COVID happened. So it was maybe maybe even like 5 or 6 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. But and then after that, you had a bunch of people just leave on their own accord because they were like, well, this is a sinking ship, so I'm out. And so like Ben Hansen formed MinMax and like gathered some of the people that were let go there, but a bunch of the other staff have like gone on to either write for different outlets or just like get into the actual games industry as like in various positions. Like Andy McNamara, who was like around since the start, who's like their one of their higher ups there, works at EA now. And so all of them were tweeting about it. You can like search Game Informer on Twitter, and they've all been talking about it. But one of the interesting things is the MinMax Discord is like trying to sort of archive and preserve as much of the Game Informer content as they can. I'm not in their Discord, so I can't see what's there, but I think that's kind of a cool thing that they're trying to do, because you can't access the website to grab stuff from there. Fortunately, there is, because it's a physical magazine, some of that is just preserved physically if you just have the magazines. But who knows how much longer the Game Informer YouTube channel and like podcast feeds will still be around to sort of archive the years and years worth of podcast episodes and videos and live streams that they've done. So
there's so much interesting content, even because you were talking about MinMax, like Ben Hansen will frequently reference, like, I did a video back when I was at Game Informer, go check it out. Those like rapid fire videos are so interesting to watch, because you get like all these weird little tidbits of just like interesting lore. It's such a good way to do an interview. It's so crazy. It's all just going to go away probably.
It is crazy. And they were really like kind of the last and best, like, I don't know, big actual game magazine. Like, I don't know. I'm sure there are others out there that I'm not aware of, but
I mean, I can't remember if we talked about this. They opened a new Barnes and Noble next to where I live. And I was like, oh, go check this out. And Barnes & Noble is like very different now. There's like a new way they're making Barnes & Nobles.
Oh, really?
Where it's kind of a weird vibe, but they do still have like a magazine, a periodical section. And I did stop by and I saw a Game Informer. And then I just saw a bunch of other weird magazines that are like in the gaming section, but I couldn't tell you any of their names. And they're all like hyper specific. Like I think I saw, this is maybe wrong, but I think I saw a magazine that was just about the concept of Tomb Raider, the video game, which doesn't make any sense. And how could that be sustainable? But
it's
I don't
probably
know.
it's probably like I feel like different magazines will do like specials, like they'll release like a special magazine devoted to like Casablanca or whatever, where it's not like a full magazine where every issue is about Casablanca, but they'll do like a big deep dive magazine release for it. But
Game Informer was the only one where I was like, oh man, and I like picked it up and looked through it and it was very nice. It's wild. I was subbed for a while, so I have like a good number of issues just laying around somewhere that I can go back and flip through. So yeah, it's definitely a shame that it's gone now, and not even like just shutting down the print version and just like forcing them to like move to like an online outlet only. Like they didn't even take that approach. The most recent issue that they were working on, Kyle Hilliard was tweeting that they're like 70% done with that, and now I don't even know if it's gonna release or not. Like I doubt it will, because it seems like they just shut down the entire operation. But yeah, I feel like people are gonna go out and just buy up issues of Game Informer as much as they can, just to like, I don't know, I guess for archival purposes, but like maybe even it'll be worth something to gamers if you want to sell it at some point. But yeah, crazy times. I also wonder, I was watching Dan Tack, who's formerly of Game Informer. I think he now works in the games industry in some space, but he was streaming the other night, and I just tuned in to see if he would talk about it. And of course he was talking about it, but one thing he brought up that I didn't even think about was like, what's going to become of the Game Informer vault? Because they have this like giant, basically museum or library of content of like old games. Some of them are like game demos or like pre-release stuff that companies would send out to games journalists to like play, before release for preview purposes. And some of those are like games that didn't release. So like there's all kinds of like history from the games industry there. And like, who knows where that is now? Like who has access to it? What's going to happen to it? I don't know.
but I don't know. It's just crazy to think about, but
it's crazy that, like, I don't know anything about business, but I mean, it was such an institution. I don't know how you don't make money off of it. Like, Keeley was tweeting about all this crazy stuff that happened. Like, there was a point in time where there was going to be a big release of a video game at an E3, and Game Informer had enough pull to be like to talk to that studio and be like, hey, you should not show this trailer because it's going to be our next cover. And the publisher was like, okay, yeah, we're going to not show at E3 because we're going to be your cover. And I think when GTA 5, or no, maybe when it was Red Dead Redemption came out, they didn't get the cover of Game Informer, and instead they were like, oh man, we didn't get the cover. They bought a cover wrap so that they could still be the cover that month on Game Informer, because it was like such a big deal to be the cover story on Game Informer. But I mean, definitely magazines are a little bit a thing of the past, but just like the brand, I feel like is so recognizable.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like, what are they gonna, I don't know if they're gonna try to because they own the brand, whatever. The GameStop now, they're basically the only thing they have left of anything is the Game Informer brand. So I wonder if they are going to try to sell that or just let it sit and collect dust.
I feel like at this point, I mean, they've laid off all the staff. They'll probably just scrap it for parts and sell like whatever's left of the magazine operation. But yeah, that's crazy. Gene Park, who I think writes for Washington Post about games, was tweeting that like Game Informer once boasted circulation that embarrassed the largest American newspapers, and their covers were as good as anything you'd see on the New Yorker.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, it is like an institution that everybody knows about. So it is like, why wouldn't you try to sell it? Let them go independent. Don't just like close it down and scrap it for parts, you know?
I wonder like when they're going to sell off the URL, because like everything involved in that costs, or like they could make money off it. So if they are going to strip it for parts, you got to imagine at some point the GameInformer.com address is just going to go for sale. And like, what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, that was another thing Dan Tack mentioned, was like when all of those, you know, they shut down the Game Informer website, all those URLs will break. And that means like, what's going to happen to like Metacritic scores? It's just like, there's a lot of different outcomes that will happen because of shutting down Game Informer. It's just like, its footprint was so widespread that it's hard to imagine right now the impact that closing it down is going to have. So
it's wild.
It is wild. But I think another wild story is this whole Bungie layoff situation.
Yes.
I don't know how much you have followed all that has gone on, because we have a little bit been out on Destiny and we've not maybe followed it as closely over the last few years. But Bungie announced that they were laying off 220 employees, which is 17% of the studio. Another 155 people were being moved elsewhere within Sony Interactive. And another roughly like 40 Bungie employees are going to be spun out to create a new studio under Sony. And that's like less than a year since their previous round of layoffs, which was in like October, November last year.
Yeah. And
that was roughly like 100 people as well. And Bungie CEO Pete Parsons, who's like the real bad guy in the story, he said last year when they laid off people that they had missed their revenue target by 45% and that they were losing money. And so they delayed Marathon and I think The Last Shape as well, which was the last big...
The Last Shape was delayed.
Last big DLC update for Destiny. But this is a crazy story because they're basically saying, okay, so Destiny 3 never existed. That was never going to happen. It was not on the table. Instead of doing the yearly, like annual release model for DLC content, we're going to stop doing that and go to like smaller content drops that maybe they'll be able to do more often. But they laid off a bunch of people, so they're going to have fewer people to do that. And they have laid off. I don't know if it was like directly laid off or if they more like just left the company because of the leadership shakeup. But like their VP of production, Mark Noseworthy, and executive creative director, Luke Smith, were working on this spinoff game called Payback, which was supposed to be this like a third-person action game that was sort of inspired by like Warframe, and I think
this is interesting to me. I think this would have done well. I mean, based on how they're describing it, because what I have long said, I think the reason both of us kind of dipped out of Destiny 2 is, I don't know, it just got to be too much. Like, there's too many competing systems and currencies, and if you skip one season, there's like all this lore you're missing, and it just got to be like, at the end of the day, the thing you're chasing for, the thing you're trying to get like more powerful for, is the raid, which you and I never really engaged with.
Right.
So there was kind of a thing where like the story's ramping up and your gear is ramping up and you hit this wall where like, okay, now you have to find 5 other people. But this Payback was like I don't think it was a universe refresh, but it was definitely a very different game. Like you said, yeah, third person, inspired by Warframe, which is just like, what would that have looked like? I am so curious to know if like it would be the same maps, but you're in third person. I don't know. It's something I really would like to know more about, but now it seems like we never will.
Yeah, and I mean, laying off those 2 guys in particular is like a crazy part of the story, because every single like E3 Destiny update presentation was those 2 guys like on camera. They were like the public face of Bungie for years, and now they're gone. So how does that, I feel like that will deeply impact Destiny from here on out. I don't know.
We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary, because it released in September 10 years ago, 2014.
Well, yeah, and like I know they initially positioned it as a 10-year game. Yeah. And I don't know if that was how they sold it to Activision, because they were, or maybe it was, who were they under at the time? Because they had changed hands like 3 different times.
Yeah, it's so confusing, because they were independent for a while, but then they got rebought. This Sony acquisition was the latest one.
And from what I can tell, they were losing money such that the alternative to being bought by Sony was insolvency, is the headline that was being shared around over this last, few days. So basically, they were going to go under if Sony didn't buy them. And they, there was an article I think Jason Schreier put out where he talked to a bunch of people, current and former workers at Bungie, and they were basically like, yeah, Bungie oversold themselves to Sony. They had ballooned like their number of workers, and they grew too much too fast, and they basically tried to do too many projects at once. And some of those, I forget what all they said they were working on, but one of them was like a possible mobile version of Destiny. And like, I don't know, they had a whole bunch of different projects in the works, and it was just like, they really just needed to focus on Destiny.
At the end of the day, I feel like this all has to fall to Pete Parsons.
Yeah.
Because he's the guy calling the shots and being like, yeah, let's try mobile. Let's just do it. Like, he needed to lead better, but unfortunately, I think he said something about placing bad bets.
Yeah.
And
everybody has been sharing around that he and some of the other employees at Bungie made a huge amount of money when they got bought by Sony.
Oh, I'm sure.
And Pete Parsons, like, people have been sharing around this link to this website where he very clearly bought like a ton of classic cars for a lot of money. And they're just like contrasting that with like how Nintendo operated in the like Wii U days, when like that was not a success for Nintendo. And the higher ups there took pay cuts so that they wouldn't have to lay anyone off. And Pete Parsons, on the other hand, bought a bunch of classic cars and then had to lay off hundreds of employees. And so it's just like, this is, I don't know. How do you mismanage Bungie so badly? Because I feel like Destiny has been, for the most part, a success. I know there was a line in Jason Schreier's article where they talked about how, like, year over year, the updates that they were releasing for Destiny had been making less and less money. So, like, obviously, I feel like the smart thing to do would be to do a Destiny 3 or like some sort of new version that would reignite like the player base and like some sort of interest to bring in new players. Because like you said, it is like very convoluted if you're just getting into it.
So much now. They constantly are building on systems, and you have to like be aware of what happened. Like if I was to replay Destiny, or if I was to get back into it, load up my save, I would probably have hours of cutscenes I would have to get through to just know what's going on in the universe.
Well, and how much of that is like still around? Because they cut out like a bunch of the stuff that was there at the start of Destiny 2.
It's true.
And it's been replaced by other content. So like I wouldn't even know where I'm at or what's going on. And that was one of the things that they talked about they need Bungie to work on, is like moving forward. After all of this stuff went down, they need to do like smaller content drops, but also like improve the onboarding for new players. And you would think that the conclusion of their like 10-year story arc that they've been doing with Bungie, it would be like the perfect time to drop a Destiny 3 and be like, here's a clean slate. Please come back to our game. But that apparently was never a part of the plan. But there was talk about like rebranding Destiny so it doesn't have like a 2 in the name, maybe. I don't know. Like there are still a ton of people that work at Bungie, and they're probably just, very, very talented, and they are still working on updates. But the feeling is that like, why would you go back to Destiny right now? The player base is probably not very optimistic at the moment. But you need Marathon to land and be very, very good. And it's
otherwise,
I mean, it's an extraction shooter. And other than Tarkov, I have not seen one of those blow up in a big way.
It's true. Yeah, so, Tarkov was very popular, and so it spawned a bunch of Tarkov likes, but none of them really hit as good as Escape from Tarkov. So like, and also Tarkov, I don't think we ever talked about it on the podcast, but they had like a bunch of problems. Like their developers, I don't know enough to talk about this with any authority, but they had a bunch of like scandals happen with like microtransactions, and like I think there was like a weird battle pass thing that was going to cost some amount of money. I don't know. I have not done any research on this, but it's not what we're talking about. But yeah, I don't really feel like any need, like this payback thing probably would, and also, frankly, a Destiny 3, I probably would have gotten back into it. But, they have decided to not do that.
Yeah, evidently that was never in the plans, I guess. They were never working on it, which seems crazy to me. But yeah, there is a common refrain that you hear from like some of these big companies where a lot of people, just sort of thought, well, there's Bungie magic. It'll eventually all come together. That happened with BioWare with like Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda. And it happened with Arcane with, what was that game?
Redfall. Yeah.
Where they are just like, they don't really have good leadership, and they're just like working on stuff, and they're like, well, don't worry, it'll eventually come together because we have that magic. We're just like that big a studio. And clearly that's not the case. And you do need stronger leadership. And
I think the same problem that's happening with like Marvel movies, where in the past you had an idea for a movie, you developed it, you had everything thought out, and you got to like refine it and work on a central point of view. Whereas now you hear stories about how effects look really bad. And the reason for that is instead of just saying like, here's the sequence we need you to do, work on this sequence for a couple of months, they'll like Marvel movies will come to effects houses and be like, we're not really sure. Could you do like 5 different versions of this? And we'll just like see, and also maybe we'll come back a little later. And it's all just like, because it's this thing where there's 2 competing forces. There is, like, we don't really know what we're doing, so let's just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, because technology is a little bit better to the point where we can just sort of constantly be pre-visualizing stuff and putting stuff out. And so it doesn't really matter if we're not really sure what we're doing, versus, oh, there's a set timeline for this, and this needs to be done like a year from now. And those 2 things are butting up against each other, where there's no set leadership like point of view. So they're just constantly iterating instead of like continuing the thing. I think that's a big problem that happened with Anthem, where in that huge article that Jason Schreier put out, there was a part where like flying wasn't even in the game until like very late into production. They just like added it and showed some like VPs that stopped by, and they were like, okay, now you can fly in this game. Like there's just this, like, there's no clear vision happening at the top. And so everyone beneath them is just worked to the bone, because they're constantly like, well, what if you use swords instead of guns? Or like, what if you had wings? And you just like, there's not really, you're never on solid ground. And that leads to bad products and wasting a lot of money. And that leads to losing money, I feel like.
Yeah, if you had like a clear vision from the start, and you weren't just like, well, let's try this and let's try that and let's try the like 8 other different
this is
things.
due in 6 months.
Yeah. Obviously, you can more clearly and better design like one thing that you're clear you want to do, rather than like, let's try 8 different things. And by the way, have it ready to go in like a couple months. Like, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like Bungie's basically feels like they're on life support. Like they were operating independently, and I feel like that's not going to be the case anymore. And I also feel like if you're Sony and you now own Bungie, why would you not fire Pete Parsons?
Yeah,
I would let him go. He has clearly badly mismanaged this whole thing. But also, like, you remember when Sony bought Bungie, they were like, it's a huge team. They know what they're doing with like game as service stuff. We clearly want to dip our toes into game as service stuff. Let's like get that studio and help us out and work in all these different areas. I feel like that's a little bit of Bungie having oversold themselves. Like, I feel like they're clearly not capable of doing that. And everybody has brought up that Bungie was supposed to help Naughty Dog with that Last of Us multiplayer thing, and then that got shut down. So basically, I feel like Bungie got in there and was like, you don't want to be doing this.
Don't do this.
This is bad. You don't want to tie your studio down to working on this one thing for the next 10 years. Yeah. Especially if it's not going to be a good bet, in the first place. So I don't know. Also, like, clearly the worst of the Sony purchases, because they bought Bungie for like $3 to $4 billion.
Insane.
It happened during that time when there was like this arms race to buy up studios, and Jason Schreier was also tweeting, like he tweeted like a list of like, so-and-so bought this, and Microsoft bought Activision, and Sony bought Bungie, and then like a few years later, so-and-so lays off hundreds of employees from this company. Microsoft lays off tons of employees, and it's just like, I don't know. It was a bad bet to purchase all of these different studios. Clearly.
I feel like most acquisitions are not great, at least for the workers. They're great for like VPs and CEOs, but I mean, it looks good for stockholders if you come out and like say like, hey, here's this super successful studio, we bought them, so like our product is like going to get that much better. But then in the long term, acquisitions generally don't seem to work out. Like, you eventually see stuff like this where stuff suffers, and then generally like the like certain key players get kind of consumed into the bigger Sony workforce, but then everybody else just leaves, and then whatever magic there was no longer exists because everybody's joined different teams, and it's now just another part of Sony, you know?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, like, I mean, Bungie was more than likely going to fail and close down on if they had stayed on their own. Like, Sony buying them was the only reason they, because they were losing money, and they had to be bought to basically remain open and to be able to keep making Destiny. And so, yeah, for 155 people that are being moved elsewhere in Sony and the other employees that are starting a new studio, I mean, I guess that's better than them just being laid off because the entire studio closed down.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we're seeing large numbers of people being laid off after these big, massive purchases happen. So, I don't know. It's not a good time to be in the games industry, it seems.
Or to write about the games industry.
Or to even write about it. It seems like a bad time. But unless you have anything else you want to add to that, I think we can move on to maybe more optimistic news.
Yes. Let's take a turn for the positive.
Well, so if you are excited about Astrobot releasing later this year, there is a new DualSense controller that looks kind of cool, actually, that Sony posted about. They showed off the Astrobot Limited Edition DualSense controller that seems to have, like, little Astrobot eyeballs in the touchpad part of the controller. And it's, like, mostly white, but it has, like, the sort of blue handles. So that's coming up. I do like their limited edition controllers every now and then. I think there was also one that they revealed for Concord. Speaking of bad purchases from Sony, why buy the studio that was making Concord? Like, they really bet big on that, and I feel like that game is dead on arrival for the most part. What else do we have? Oh yeah, so I've been a little bit following this, but Crypt Custodian, which was one of my most anticipated games for this year.
Yes, you put this on my radar, so I'm excited to hear about this.
They released a trailer this last week that gives their official release date of August 27th. So, I mean, definitely go watch this trailer. The game looks great. It's like a sort of a top-down Metroidvania meets Zelda-like that I think you had mentioned was reminding you of Hyper Light Drifter.
Yes, big Hyper Light Drifter vibes. It's less pixelated and more painterly, I guess, but very, very similar vibes.
Yeah, this is from the developer of Sheepo and Islets. I did not play Sheepo, but I've heard it's very good. But I did play Islets, and it's a Metroidvania that's like very good, I thought. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to this game. I will definitely play it when it comes out. So yeah, new news for this game is that it's officially coming out, I think, on pretty much everything on August 27th. So just a couple weeks to wait for that.
Well, something you don't have to wait for. Well, you do have to wait for it, kind of, but maybe as this is being posted, you don't have to wait for it. Zach, there's a new Apex Legends season that it's not on my radar, but August 6th is going to be Shockwave. We've kind of dropped off of Apex, but I think I might check this out because they are adding a new map. It's been heavily hinted at in the last couple of seasons, but there's a big cyberpunk city called like E District, or I actually don't remember the name of it, but it looks cool. It's very vertical. It's very much like in a lot of the maps they have, there are city areas, points of interest, POIs they call them in this type of game. But this seems like one big city, so it's going to be an interesting way to play, especially with that new legend they released, I think last season or 2 seasons ago, whose name I also don't remember, whose ability was to go through walls and like up walls, sort of like Link in Tears of the Kingdom. She'll be very useful in this new map. Additionally, they've added a lot of quality of life stuff, like it's easier to see opponents. You get sort of a red highlight if they're close enough to you, so it's easier to track them. And the other big thing from this season is you can now dual wield the worst pistol in the game as well as the worst shotgun in the game. So that kind of gives more incentives for picking up the 2 worst weapons in the game.
You think this will? You think this will get you to jump back in?
I think I will. I think I will jump back in. I don't think I'm going to get the battle pass. We talked a little bit about it a couple weeks ago, how they have had some scandals related to the battle pass. They have split it in 2, but it seems like maybe just a kind of a money grab. And they've reverted this second decision. But initially, they were saying that you couldn't purchase the battle pass with in-game currency that you would earn by playing. That's been reverted, so you can now still use Apex coins to buy the battle pass, but they have still split it in half, and people
that was always a ridiculous decision. Yeah. Like, why on earth would you do that?
Who knows what they were thinking? It's EA at the end of the day, but yeah, I am interested in this. I think it's been a while since I've played any sort of first-person shooter. And I like this map, and I think I might jump back in.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking about maybe playing some Apex recently, if only to jump back into those like more Call of Duty style modes, like the team deathmatch and some of those modes that I tend to prefer than over battle royale stuff. But I'm curious how this update, this new stuff will be integrated into those modes, or if it's really just the battle royale mode. But
it remains to be seen. I'll be interested to see what happens. I'll report back. I might check it out this week when it launches on Tuesday.
Well, speaking of big updates that are coming to games on Tuesday, Helldivers 2 is going to have its biggest update yet, called Escalation of Freedom. And it's supposed to add some cool, interesting stuff. I know there's some new enemies and maybe some new environments. I don't know. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about how I think the No Man's Sky expedition, where you're like taking out brood queens and like you're doing a lot of combat against like insect-like creatures, made me think maybe I should jump back into Helldivers. So yeah, I'm curious about this. I maybe when you jump back into Apex, I will jump back into Helldivers. I don't know, but it would give us something to talk about for sure. But yeah, this looks cool. I enjoyed Helldivers when I played it initially. I got distracted by other things and didn't get back to it. So maybe this is the right time to get back into it.
Speaking of getting back into it, Zach, did you ever play Gothic back in the day?
I did not.
I also didn't, but my brother did, and he was very into Gothic and Gothic 2. Hallmarks of this franchise are that it's kind of it's big into simulation. There are a lot of systems in this game. And THQ Nordic had a big showcase on Friday for some reason, and they revealed, or I don't know that they had talked about it previously, but they're making a Gothic 1 remake for the modern generation. It's an interesting setting. Basically, it's you're in this valley of mines, and there are 3 different cities, or like encampments, I guess. I don't know a lot about it, but it's interesting to me, and I wonder if it will be something people talk about as being like a kind of a hidden gem or something that comes out of nowhere. Because I haven't really seen anybody talking about this.
I was gonna say I'd never even heard of this, so this is new to me.
It's got an interesting vibe. It's like kind of a third person. I think you can also maybe go first person. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting world, and
it looks like kind of like medieval fantasy.
Yeah, it's kind of medieval fantasy. There's definitely, they've added some stuff from the original. I think they are deepening more storylines and including additional quests and whatnot. It's got an interesting battle system that I'm not really familiar with. Apparently the combat is very deep, mostly melee and magic, and I think there's also archery, but I don't know. I wanted to talk about this because it seems
looks
interesting.
Vaguely like Dragon's Dogma 2.
Yeah, kind of a Dragon's Dogma 2 vibe. So I wonder if this will make an impact at all. I know that the first one is a beloved game, and so I wonder if it is just a nostalgia play or if people of the modern generation will be interested in this. But yeah, Gothic 1 remake. Check it out. And then another thing from that THQ Nordic. Oh wait, was this from the THQ Nordic? I don't remember. Maybe not, actually. This might just be something else that I saw. This is a game called The Eternal Life of Goldman. I don't really know the story, but it seems like you're an old man who has an umbrella. And this is like a little cartoon Metroidvania where you play as an old man with a cane or an umbrella. Kind of like very cartoonish, almost like Cuphead-like in a lot of places. But this looked interesting to me. Have you heard of this?
I had not. I didn't watch this THQ Nordic Digital Showcase, so this is new to me. But yeah, I am into a Metroidvania, so I'm watching the trailer now, and you're right. It's very cartoonish. It looks kind of hand drawn.
Yeah, just something that kind of came out of nowhere. Who knows? I don't think it has a release date or anything, but it's going to come out on everything. So if I'm sure this will be on the Metroidvania subreddit. People are probably talking about it, but yeah, it looked interesting.
Well, let's get into what we've been playing and watching. I have put more time into No Man's Sky. That's basically all I've been playing recently. It's one of those games that, like, when it gets its hooks in me again after a long period of time, I just it's all I want to do with my spare time. And so I played through the expedition probably like 2 or 3 times now, and got the all the special stuff that you get for having completed it. There's the community goal stuff is still ongoing. So if you jump into the expedition, you can kill like so many of those biological horrors, or like the sentinels, or the different brood queens, like every day, to sort of contribute towards the community goal. And completing the different phases of the community goal seems like it's gonna unlock more cosmetic items for, I believe, one of the exocrafts. It's like the mech, basically. You get different cosmetic items for that. So still worth jumping into. I think that's going to be running throughout the month, so you still have plenty of time to get through it. But yeah, it's just a really fun, good game. I actually, last night I was playing some, and it's the weekend as we're recording this, and so they always have at the Anomaly, if you go to the Nexus, they have like special weekend missions that you can do to earn Quicksilver, which is a special currency that you use to buy special like cosmetic items, or different things that you can craft in your bases. And I was able to complete that, and I ran a couple others, because they always have one that's like for 400 Quicksilver, but on the weekends they have one for like, it's like 1200 or maybe 1800 Quicksilver. And so I ran a few of those and was able to get a new cape cosmetic item for my character, and I was wearing that around yesterday, and it was very cool. So check out No Man's Sky. It's really good. I've had a few issues on PS5, like some weird like hard freezes every now and then where I had to like close out of it and restart it. But the game's good about like auto saving such that I've like never lost progress. So that's not been an issue. But
that's nice.
But yeah, check it out. It runs super well on Steam Deck. I haven't played the only platform I think I've not played it on. Well, that's not true. I was going to say I don't think I've played it on Xbox actually, but I was going to say I don't think I've played it on Switch yet. But so I'm not sure how it runs on Switch would be my one question. But other than some hard freezes now and then, I think it does run pretty well on PS5, and obviously it runs really well on PC and Steam Deck. So check it out. What about you?
I've still been playing Luigi's Mansion 2 and The Case of the Golden Idol, but I don't really have much to say about those. I wanted to shout out a show that I think is near and dear to both our hearts.
Yes.
The IT Crowd, which I watched in college, but we decided to do a rewatch of it. It's a very good show. I think the reason we started watching it again, it's one of those shows that has great blooper reels on YouTube. And so we were watching one of those, and my wife was like, "Oh, I've never seen this show before." She was aware of it, but she just had not really watched it. So I'm kind of showing it to her out of order. I'm interested to know, like, what would you say it doesn't have to be in any order, but what are 3 of your favorite episodes? Because I'll tell you 3 of my favorites.
I love the one about the fire, where they basically set a fire in the office. I love the episode where Matt Berry first comes in.
Yeah.
And I think the fire one that I'm thinking of is also the one where they have like the stress machines.
Oh yeah.
Cause that is such a funny episode. But I also love, there's like a later episode. It might even have been like a reunion episode type of thing, like sort of post the last episode they were doing, where Moss creates the game board show.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the same episode, but it's the episode where Roy like is he's like rude to a short coffee barista, and he and what's her name, Jen, they're out, and they get like somebody uses a phone to record them being rude to people on the street. In context, it makes sense, but and then there's the episode, I don't remember which one this is, but it's the episode where Moss wears women's trousers, and it finally makes him confident. I think that's the same episode as the game board one, because I think that's what in the end makes the game board show interesting, because he has like all this, he's finally feeling confident on screen. So
the 3 that I showed her as her first 3 were that one you talked about, where the first Matt Berry episode where he comes in.
So funny.
I also showed her the countdown episode.
Oh yeah,
street countdown.
Yeah,
which is very funny. And then maybe my favorite episode of it is the one where they go to the play.
Oh yeah, that is like maybe one of the best episodes they did.
And then like they kind of part ways in the middle during intermission, and then she comes back, and both Roy and Moss are in like crazy situations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hilarious. Like the moment, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't watched this yet, because they should see it, but there's the moment where Jen like walks back in, and Moss is like behind the counter like making drinks for people, and she's like, "What are you doing here?" So funny. One of the best moments in the show. A
great show. I think currently the only way to watch it, I think so I don't know what you might be able to watch on BritBox, but I don't subscribe to that. It is free on Pluto though. Pluto TV is a free streaming service.
Yeah.
But it is with ads. So that's how we're watching it.
Well, speaking of like British humor, I've been watching more episodes of Taskmaster, but the Taskmaster New Zealand, I think it's like season 3 or 4 that they're uploading to YouTube right now. They have all the episodes for free on YouTube. So There's like 16 or 17 seasons of the UK version up on YouTube, and they've got like several seasons of the New Zealand version of the show. That's actually pretty good. Some of those spinoffs, you're like, it's not the original group, but the New Zealand version of the show is actually really good. And they are still working on releasing episodes of that. I think like every Friday a new episode drops of the New Zealand version of Taskmaster just on the Taskmaster YouTube page. So check it out there. And if you get into that show, there's like multiple podcasts where like former people that were on the show talk to people who were on the show as sort of like recap type podcasts or like behind the scenes type stuff. So definitely check it out if you're into British humor or you like sort of fun, quirky game show type things. But that's out there. Any parting wisdom for this week?
Yes. My parting wisdom is that you should check out British television if you haven't.
Yeah, British humor, British sitcoms in particular are like some of the best TV out there, for sure.
Golden age in like the early 2000s of like IT Crowd, Garth Marenghi, Black Books is another one that I really like.
I love that show, Spaced.
All these classic ones.
Yeah, pretty much anything by that sort of comedy troupe of like Matt Berry and Noel Fielding and what's the name of the actor that plays Moss?
Oh, Richard Ayoade?
Yeah, he's great. They're all great. Definitely, I feel like there was an era of like British sitcoms from like 2005 to like 2015 where they were just like banger after banger of like great British sitcoms. So maybe just sub to BritBox and try some stuff out.
Yeah,
because there's probably a lot on there. But on that note, go ahead and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter at Starside Cafe, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.